Following the British victory at the Battle of Talavera in Spain 1809, Wellington was forced to withdraw back into Portugal in the face of the superior numbers of the opposing French armies. Napoleon Bonaparte had ordered Marshal Massena to drive the British out of Portugal. This began with Marshal Ney taking the fortified city of Claudio Rodrigo after a siege in July 1810. Ney followed this shortly after with a skirmish with the British, commanded by Brigadier General Crawford at the Battle of the Coa River, where, although heavily outnumbered, Crawford engaged the French and narrowly avoided disaster. When the siege of Almeida ended in late August with a massive explosion of the fortress's magazine, the path was clear for the French to advance on the Portuguese capital, Lisbon. Meanwhile, Wellington was constructing a defensive line of fortifications to help stop the French from attacking Lisbon, named the Lines of Torres Vedras. Wellington had hoped that the siege at Almeida would halt the French advance for some weeks. However, on discovering that the French had entered Portugal, Wellington attempted to slow the French advance to allow the completion of his fortifications by destroying particular bridges and roads to restrict the number of routes into Portugal the French could use. In an attempt to check the French advance, by the end of September, Wellington had occupied the ridge at Bussaco, which blocked the main Coimbra to Lisbon road. Wellington had approximately 50,000 British and Portuguese troops under his command. The 10-mile-long Bussaco Ridge was a strong defensive position, with the walled ruins of Bussaco Convent on its northern end, and its slopes covered in ravines, rocks and heather, making it difficult for attacking forces to remain in tight formation. The ridge also offered Wellington the opportunity to place many of his troops on the reverse slope to help protect them from French artillery fire. This made Massena uncertain as to the disposition and strength of the Allied forces. To enable better communications and to help deploy reinforcements quickly, Wellington had had a track built which ran the length of the reverse slope of the ridge. Wellington positioned his troops ready for attacks from the French using the 3 roads running across the ridge. The British were deployed with Major General Cole on the far left of the British positions, next to the troops of General Crawford, with Major General Spencer to Crawford's right. Major General Picton was positioned in the British centre, with General Leith to his right, while Major General Hill held the British right flank. Massena's army consisted of approximately 60,000 men, with the 2nd Corps under General Reynier on their right flank, containing the divisions of Merle and Houdelet, with the 6th Corps led by General Ney on their left flank, containing the divisions of Marchand, Mermont and Luzon. Believing he had a significant numerical advantage, Massena chose to conduct a series of frontal attacks on the British positions rather than a flanking movement. Having observed the French deploying during the previous evening, Wellington redeployed his troops to meet the expected attack from the central road. Reynier's division was the first to attack the ridge in the early morning mist of the 27th of September, with Houdelet's 1st Brigade. As their leading troops reached the top of the ridge, they were confronted by one British and two Portuguese battalions in line with artillery support. As the French attempted to change formation from column into line, they were met with intense Allied musket volley fire, which threw the French into disarray, but they managed to remain on a small part of the ridge. Meanwhile, again in the British centre, Merle's division began to attack the ridge. Picton quickly deployed reinforcements by using the ridge top track. The French were met at the top of the ridge by two British and two Portuguese battalions. As they tried unsuccessfully to change formation from column into line, they too were met with intense Allied musket volley fire, resulting in the French withdrawing down from the ridge. Renier then sent forward Houdelay's 2nd Brigade. However, before the French could consolidate their position, they were attacked by brigades of Leith and some of Picton's men, which forced the French off the ridge. On observing this rout, Houdelay's 1st Brigade withdrew to the foot of the ridge. Meanwhile, on the British left flank, on hearing the sound of battle, Ney assumed that the French were successfully attacking the ridge and ordered his troops to attack. Lauzon's 1st Brigade fought their way towards the crest of the ridge. However, as they approached the convent grounds, two British regiments which had been lying down stood up and fired concentrating volley fire at point-blank range, followed by a bayonet charge, which resulted in Lauzon's 1st Brigade being routed. Meanwhile, Lauzon's 2nd Brigade advanced, but ran into close-range artillery and musket volley fire, which also resulted in this brigade being routed. A final attack from a brigade from Marshall's division was successfully repelled by a Portuguese brigade. Although both sides continued skirmishing for the rest of the day, the battle ended with Massena calling off any further French attacks on the ridge at around 2 p.m. During the Battle of Bussaco, the Anglo-Portuguese suffered approximately 1,250 casualties, while the French casualties were approximately 4,500. Massena now appreciated the true strength of Wellington's position and the size of his forces. Therefore, later that afternoon, he redeployed his troops to move northwards in an attempt to outflank the British. Wellington, on seeing that his left flank was about to be turned, began to withdraw southwards towards the lines of Torres Vedras, which he reached in good order on October the 10th. The French pursued Wellington, but were taken by surprise by the line's fortifications. After probing the lines, culminating in the Battle of Sobral on the 13th and 14th of October, despite Massena concluding that he had little prospect of conducting a successful attack, he was reluctant to withdraw. However, with a shortage of supplies, as a result of the scorched earth tactics employed by the Allies, the French troops began to starve. So on the 6th of March 1811, Massena started a reluctant withdrawal, which turned into a fighting retreat back towards his winter quarters in Spain. He was constantly harried by Allied attacks and skirmishes, which included the Battle of Sabugal. During the retreat, the French lost a further 25,000 men, captured or dead from starvation or sickness, before they finally reached Spain in early 1811. The French never invaded Portugal again.